my ranking of every school at max level in Wizard101 PvP. So I actually don't have a max level character of every school yet, but for those schools that I don't have, I'm just going to use my Storm for it, since it's easy. And yeah, I guess we'll get into things. So number 8 is going to be Balance. Before the patch, they were fine. I want to say they were maybe number 4, number 5. But after this recent patch, Balance has just kind of taken too hard of a fall. It all started in the last update, in the last year's fall update, when Lore Master got nerfed. And that was a pretty big blow to Balance at all levels. Lore now does close to nothing, and it's just not a very good spell. Next on the list would be Mana Burn. Mana Burn got nerfed in 2020 Spring Update, and rightfully so. I mean, it was going to be turn-based, and we didn't want people just mana burning for all your pips, but I feel like it got hit a little too hard. The damage aspect is obviously still very good, and I honestly think it needs to stay now, but the pip removal I feel like is a bit too low. If it removed maybe 4 pips instead of just 3, we'd be chilling. But yeah, there's that. Diffuses also got nerfed in the spring update. What else was there? There was reshuffles a long time ago, but that doesn't really matter too much. Yeah, otherwise, Balance has lost a ton of stuff before and still managed to be a pretty good school with a high skill ceiling. And with this update that just came out, oh my, I think it's I think that's the nail in the coffin, because not only did Balance's shads get nerfed, which honestly kind of kept them in the game, kind of. I said kind of twice. But Balance's shads kept them in the game really well. Like, they had Gaze, they had Worm, but now those have been nerfed, and they do, I guess, decent damage, but nowhere near what any of the other shads do. And like, one thing that kind of indirectly nerfed Balance again was infile cast rates going down. They needed to go down, but Balance was able to still be viable because they had Supernova. And Supernova is a very unbalanced spell, don't get me wrong, but it's all they have left, minus their heals. And I honestly see a Supernova nerf coming in the near future, like maybe before the end of this year. And that's gonna, like, Balance will just not be playable after that. But yeah, Balance is just kind of, it's that school that is just a rung below everyone else, because they can't blade stack, they can't hit very hard, they can heal, but even that is like counterable. Like, if you have Snowdrift, which I don't pack it personally, but some sweatier ices do pack it, and yeah. Anyway, let's go on to number 7. Coming in at number 7, we have the Shadow School. Now, you may be wondering, Julo, why do you have the Shadow School in this list at all? And the reason for that is there was a popular strategy revolving around Dark Nova, and it just got popular in the past year, but, and like, it was also a really good strat. It was enough to put Shadow up like around what Balance was, like 4 or 5. But with this recent update, Dark Nova has kind of just fallen off pretty badly. I don't know if I have the spell on this character, not gonna lie, I didn't check. I think I have Dark Fiend, but oh wait, no, I do. So this is what Nova is now. It used to be 1600 damage after 2 rounds, and now it's just 1200. This, obviously, a very not good spell. Don't ask why I have Seraph. You don't need to worry about it. But Nova used to be a lot better because it was easy to, blade up and do things that it likes. And it even gives you blades as you do things that it likes. And you already had to give up a lot of stuff for this. Farming Shadow Pierce Jewels from the Shadow Palace at the end of Chrysalis, it was pretty tedious for the people that I knew that used the strategy. And for me, it's kind of like balance if they were able to blade up and hit hard. And Dark Nova is based a lot around being able to one-shot. And now, again, looking at the card, it doesn't look like that's going to be as easy anymore, because you obviously can't enchant Dark Nova. But it did a lot of damage, 1600 for obviously 2 Shadow Pips. It's still like kind of viable now, but with the way Backlash works, if you get too low, you can die from it. Like if you get below 10% of your max health, good luck with that. Because you might just tie the match up. I've seen people say that of like 6 matches that they did using Dark Nova, they were able to tie 5 and then win 1. Like it still does the damage that it needs to, I think, because 1200 is still a lot, and you can't set for Shadow. There is a Shadow Shield on this amulet that I finally got, but it's only 1 copy, and it can't be enchanted with Aegis, so it can just be shattered off. And yeah, overall, it was a good strategy. Very good burst damage type thing, but like even before it was hard countered by offensive schools, but now it's like it just doesn't do what it needs to do anymore. Like you can tie matches and lose them just as easily. Even with Shads getting nerfed, schools still have strong spells that can take care of your wizard if you're using Dark Nova. Because, again, if you're using Dark Nova, you actually have to use some pretty pay-to-win gear. I know that there's a pack out right now from Christmas in July. I think by the time I upload this video, it won't be there anymore, but you can get some boots that give like 26 universal damage. There's a lot of gear that goes into Dark Nova that it costs a lot. One of my friends, Shunrei, you might know him, he spent like 4,500 empowers just trying to get the Dwarven set just for the boots. So yeah, doing Dark Nova was already costly enough, but now it's just no longer really worth doing, because a lot of the tools that you would use outside of the Nova itself were like mana burns if you're a balanced Nova. Some schools like Ice can still do Nova pretty well, but I don't know. Like if you're Ice, you might as well just A-bomb, right? But anyway, gonna move on to number 6. And low-key kind of pains me that there isn't really a good non-underwater place that's like storm based, that's not Triton. But it's whatever. Yeah, so number 6 is gonna have to go to Storm, I would have to say, because again, Storm's health pool is extremely low, as everybody knows, and that honestly keeps it from being able to do like the damage that it needs to as a damaged school. There are some strategies that allow Storm Wizards to get like 7.3k health or higher, but to get that, I think Sauce does this. I think he runs Turquoise Robe, which does give shad rating, by the way. So that puts you at a disadvantage. And he also uses, I think, Dragoon's Amulet. I'm not entirely sure on all that, but the point being, you sacrifice a lot of stuff. Like, I think he has to run Storm Sniper on his pet because that's just how much accuracy he gives up. Yeah, so Storm, number 6. And they're low on the list for the reason they always have been. It's just their low health and lack of utility. If Storm actually had like a good utility spell, like a 4-pip like overtime or something, I bet they'd be a lot higher. Because that's literally all they need. And it's like, there you go, right? But unfortunately they don't have that. And again, their lack of health kind of just, it's kind of like a big middle finger to Storm Wizards everywhere. I guess Scion is extremely overpowered, like literally. It does 1400 base, and that's 2800 with the times 2, 3100 if you epic enchant it, but and yes, that's how this math works. For some reason, the epic enchant does not double, so that's nice. But yeah, Storm's offensive capabilities are good, but like a shield will stop them from doing anything. So that's why Storm is number 6. Moving on to number 5. Now, number 5, I'm gonna have to give to Life, and you could make a case that Ice cannot beat a crit Life when they just heal over and over again. But that's really their best matchup. That's really Life's best matchup. Because against most other classes, like against offensive classes like Fire and Storm, they will lose most of the time. Because that's unfortunately just how Life is. It's like if they one-shot you, you can't heal. So them bringing back Guardian Spirit does put this above Storm, but again, it's like, and by the way, this I'm not taking into account like jading. If we were taking into account Jade Life, this would be number 1 or number 2. But yeah, Life, again, it's like their shads got nerfed. Like even Life versus Life matches are just not good right now, because like Gnomes no longer gives any dispels. It would be good if it gave 1, but I saw a poll that Wiz ran on Twitter, and they said you have to either brick Gnomes damage to get even 1 dispel, or you can keep Gnomes damage and just have a Guiding Light. So I don't know, take that as you will, but I don't think we'll be getting back any good utility for Life versus Life matches. Life's gotten better in PvE, but this is obviously a PvP list, so I mean, I guess to each their own. You can play Life in a bunch of different ways. You could do a tank Life strat, you can do a blade stacking strat, although obviously if you're going to blade stack into like a Spiny or something, that is easily counterable by, I was about to press P and go to Triage, but that's not a spell that I have yet, so yeah, I mean, and Triage in itself is pretty strong for 0 pips, but yeah, that's why Life is going to be number 5. It definitely has its good places, especially in healing, but offensively it's not that capable. And like, I guess Hungry Caterpillar still does good damage, and you can do good burst damage with that, but it's just not as great as the top 4. So speaking of the top 4, I am going to move on to number 4. Now, Death is going to be coming in at number 4, because Death, honestly, it's a good class now, because Drains are now fully enchantable, so things like Kurlu, Dr. Von's Monster, things like even Vampire is now viable, because you can enchant it with like a Gargantuan and it'll do 600 now, which is super nice. Before it would only do like 500, give or take. I can't remember. The one Scarecrow that I keep in my deck on my Legendary is now a lot more viable. But at max, Death is still very good, especially if you have Headless. And you can poison spam, you can blade up really well. All in all, Death is just one of the better schools to play. It's not as good as the top 3, but you can easily play it and fare well against the top 3 schools, because Death against Myth is pretty good. Against Fire, it's now better, and against Ice, I mean, Death versus Ice matches were never good anyway, but if you have a Death Wizard, I know Death is a pretty popular class, but if you have a Death Wizard and you want to do some PvP at max level, it's totally a viable option. I would highly recommend trying out the Death School at max. Because, I mean, just think about it. Death has so much good utility. It has Blades. It has things like Infection for heal spammers. Like, Death is a direct counter to life. It has Doom and Gloom. The minion is not too great, but you don't really use minions as a Death anyway. It has Feint, if you ever want to use that for some reason. It can take off Efreet weaknesses, or Juju's in general. Speaking of Juju, I don't have it on this character because it's not a max, but you can obviously use that, put a -90 on your opponent. You obviously have all your drains. You have Headless, which is an extremely busted spell. You have a ton of overtime potential within Poison, Deer Knight, and then Skeletal Dragon. Overall, Death is a very good school. I think the only place where it lacks is in raw offensive capability. If Death spells did just a little more damage, Death would obviously be in a lot better of a place. That's why it's so good at Legendary, because at Legendary you have a lot more raw damage spells and not as many drains, because I know you get Vaughn, Krulu, and Scion, which are all big, like, spell slots, if that makes any sense. All of those are drains, and they used to not be as viable. Now they are, but they still don't do as much raw damage as, say, for example, like how much a Headless would in place of, I don't know where I'm going this, but like a Headless would in place of, for example, a Vampire. That's pretty nice. But yeah, now I'm going to move on to number 3. Now, coming in at number 3, I'm going to have to give this one to Myth, because Myth has so much capability within it. The only thing it lacks, I want to say, is a low pip overtime. And even still, if you need to take off a shield, you always have minions, which are actually good for Myth. These in particular are not that reliable, but if you need to, you could use like a Cyclops or a Troll minion if you're feeling risky. But Myth has a lot of utility. Myth is probably one of the best utility spells in the game. Using an overtime on a Myth, instead of triaging it, a Myth can shift it back over, which does the rest of the overtime damage to the other player, which is one of the big reasons why overtimes now are not as powerful as they used to be. Shifts, obviously better than triage, but it's not as common in TC form, so Myth being able to have it as a regular spell helps them a ton. Shatter, obviously good. They have good lore spells, like Keeper of the Flame does pretty good damage, and also gives another setup. Ninja Pigs doing crazy high damage for 5 pips. Earthquake being able to remove all blades and traps and all that from your opponent. This is especially good against Jades. You also have Minotaur that can just double hit. This kind of serves as Myth's low pip shield breaker spell. Never forget Orthrus. King Art, while not as good anymore, because again it can just be countered with triage, is still pretty good, because if you use a King Art into, like, I don't know, for example, a Yaga, it's going to do a lot of damage, and it makes your opponent think about that risk they're taking. It's like, do I triage and take an open Yaga, or do I shield the overtime out? Like, you know, there's options there. Medusa with a 2-round stun, the only 2-round stun in the game that is not on a pay-to-win Maycast wand. So you better stun block if you're going against a Myth. Speaking of stun blocks, Myth Scion is arguably the easiest to set up. It requires 0 pips in total for setup, because all you need to do is just stun block twice, and then there you go. You have 3 stun blocks on yourself, and even after you use it, and like, if it doesn't kill, you still have 1 stun block left over, so it's like, you're fine. Celestial Calendar is able to steal a pip. This can get you out of some tough situations if it needs to. Mystic Colossus, while getting bricked for PvE, is suddenly very good for PvP because of the Pierce mechanic at the beginning. And Witch's House Call is one of the most powerful shads in the game right now. This does crazy high damage, and it also summons a minion. Obviously, pretty nice. So that's mostly what Myth is. If you want to use something like a Talos or something, I guess go for it, but that's 5 pips that you're throwing away. But yeah, one thing I did forget to mention is that Myth also has Athena. I haven't crafted it yet because I don't have any TCs, but Athena is a very good spell, especially for 5 pips. So yeah, I think that about wraps it up for Myth. You can also reduce the threat on your target. Yeah, let's go, guys. But yeah, moving on to number 2. Now, Fire is still one of the top schools in PvP, coming in at number 2. Unfortunately, they are now even further separated from the number 1 school, but they are still a pretty strong class. They can use things like a Freet, which, even after the nerf, you still don't want to hit with a minus 45 on. So, like, you still have incentive to take it off. But it does a lot of damage. Fire has probably the highest damage of any class at all, at max, in a PvP setup. Because how the damage is scaled, you can see Fire's using like 170 damage setups, which is crazy. And like, they still maintain good stats otherwise. They can get almost 40 Pierce. They can get like 8k health if they use Turquoise, which subsequently gives them over 40 Pierce. And spells like FFA do so much still. It's wild. King Art can stun if you don't put up a stun block. And then they also have spells like Brim, which do a ton of damage for 4 pips. They also have spells like Burning Rampage, which admittedly are not too great anymore because of the whole turn-based thing, plus it going off after 3 rounds. But it's still interesting to see a Fire pull out Burning Rampage. It's very hard to shield against them, and if you can't shield against a high damage school, best of luck to you. You're gonna need it. But yeah, for 2 pips, they can put an overtime on you, keeping you from shielding. That is one of their best, I guess, things that they can do. One more thing that they can do is they can use fuel for just 2 pips and put 3 traps on you, and they can stack a potent fuel, like a pet fuel, a regular fuel. There's a lot of fuels that a Fire Wizard can stack on you, and take off shields and just hit straight through like a set shield. It'll still do mass. Their Scion also revolves around traps, and if you're able to stack 2 fuels onto your opponent, like, well, there you go. You're doing double the damage now. And overall, Fire is, without a doubt, the best offensive school in max level PvP because of its utility and its raw damage power. If you go against a fire wizard, I would be pretty careful because they can also use a pet fire beetle, which puts 3 traps on you and breaks a shield. So yeah, fire is able to buff very easily and break shields at the same time. And like, they're a high damage school, like I said, so good luck fighting against them. I and most people run Fire Ward because that's just how broken they are. They can just do so much damage in one turn, so that's why a lot of people run Ward to it. Logically, I mean, there you go, there's the option. Logically, I mean, if you're going against a high damage school that you can't really shield that well against, then, well, you know, there you go. So, without further ado, I'm going to move on to the number 1 school in max level PvP. Now, Ice is without a doubt the best school in Wizard101 max level PvP because they have a lot of spells that they can use that do things like put an overtime on your opponent that not only does good damage, but is also relatively cheap in terms of pip cost. And yeah, I guess I'll just show you some of their spells. So Ice is the school that has stun block just trained, so that's always nice. Ice can stun for 0 pips, one of the 2 spells, one of the 2 schools that can do that. Their blades are massive, especially when sharpened. Their bubble is stronger than all of the other classes, at 35% in relation to most of the other schools' 25%. They can steal heals, which is interesting. It's kind of not the best thing to do. It's not the best thing to pack, rather, but like, it's very situational. But when the situation arises, if you go against like a crit balance, he crits a heal, you can go ahead and take it from them. They can steal tower shields, pretty crazy. This minion is pretty good. I don't carry it personally, but a lot of people do. It's still pretty good. Winter Moon, pretty powerful spell. This is one of their big ones. Frostbite, being able to do a lot of damage as an overtime. Lord of Winter, with that pip removal, that is another mechanic that Ice has that is almost unique to them. Balance has mana burn, and then Myth has like stunning and stuff, but it's still pretty good. If you're not prepared enough, you can get Ice Scioned to the face, and it hurts. Let me tell you that much. And yes, now for the piece de resistance. Abominable Weaver. This spell is still extremely good, even after the nerf, because it still gives a good minus 50 tower shield. That's obviously still good. But the big thing about Weaver is that it does a lot of damage for not a lot of pips. Take that as you will, but you know, it's how it goes sometimes. Ice also has some pretty valuable treasure cards, such as Icebird. This and Storm Beetle are the only 2 cards in the game, or the only 2 treasure cards in the game, that hit and give you a blade and not a trap. Ice does actually have a variant that gives them a trap, but they usually use blades anyway, so this is an interesting lower pip overtime that you can use if you want. I personally don't use it, but you know, you can do what you want with that. They have the power to get Arcxillas, which is crazy. You can do this much damage as an Ice for 4 pips. It's even better than Enchanted Ice Wyverns. They have stuff like Cold Iron, which for schools like Life, Death, and Balance is not that great, but the other 4, it's pretty nice. Frostbite, obviously very strong. Winter Moon, strong 5 pip hit as well. Fomorian is situational, but you can still use it if you want. Lord of Winter, again, just pip removal. I could use this to be cheeky, but you know. And yeah, obviously Weaver with the whole tower shield thing. But yeah, I think that's gonna wrap up this little list, and these were my opinions on each school at max level in Wizard101 PvP. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. Like, I know I've seen some people rank the schools that just obviously, to me, did not seem correct. But this is just my opinion. And you can obviously leave yours in the comments. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one, and goodbye.